So whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Hello, folks. This is Pat Wagner with Pattern Research at Denver, Colorado, on behalf of the South Carolina State Library. And what we're going to be talking about today is the expectations model oversight without micromanagement. This project, as many things we do in library land across the United States, is being made possible by a Library Services and Technology Act grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, yay, administered by the South Carolina State Library. This program we're doing today is about a model for understanding communication in the workplace that I'm going to tell you changed my life. Before we start with the model, I have to tell you this little story that one of my mentors is a gentleman named Bill Casey, who's a behaviorist. He has a doctoral degree in behavioral psychology and works for institutions literally all over the world and is like the kind of guy you can go out and have a beer with. You know, he grew up in Pueblo, Colorado, just a sweetheart. And he was kind enough as my mentor to let me attend some of the formal trainings he did in corporate America on the model that we're going to be looking at today. So I'm sitting there pretending to be an adult wearing like a girl suit and have all these business people and he and his wife Wendy, who's also an amazing trainer and psychologist, were presenting the model. And when I understood what they were saying, I jumped to my feet and yelled, "Yes!" And everybody looked at me. And I sat down and was quiet for the rest of the program. But that's how excited I was about this model. Now, this is a great saying from the gentleman who wrote that iconic children adult novel, The Little Prince. And it's about the fact that in order to get people aligned and ready to work the way they need to, the very first thing we have to be thinking about is what are the goals and to get people engaged in the goals. And that's one of the things we're going to be talking about today. So here's the key idea. This is the summary of the whole model. If the goals, what it is that you're trying to achieve, and remember, we're going to say this several times, that's not the same as the job description. If the goals that the person or the project or the department are in charge of, if those goals are being achieved within the two sets of guidelines, what we call the professional guidelines and the civility guidelines, right? Professional and civility guidelines are professional and civility, right? Emphasis. How the person does it is up to them, and the how is called style. So we evaluate people based on, are you achieving the goals? Are we evaluate people based, are they coloring within the lines? But if they're getting it done the way that we want, the outcomes are right. That's the difference between oversight and micromanagement. So we establish these goals, we establish these guidelines, and it creates kind of a nice frame so people know, okay, I know what I'm supposed to get done, know what I'm supposed to achieve, and I'm not supposed to, as one library director said, she tells her people, you're not going to drive up on the curb, what they need to do, and then they can focus on being productive and also how they treat people. And that's an important part of what we'll be talking about today. There's 5 outcomes for this program. One is that you'll feel better about being able to check in with folks regarding the progress of projects. And for our definition, everything you do in the workplace is a project. It may be something you do over and over again, like working at a circ desk, and there's not like a finish to it. It may be some sort of special thing you're doing, like an event, programming. It may be a bigger new initiative, like a weeding initiative, or you got a group of people on a committee who are talking about, remodeling the library or even building a new building. But everything we do is a project. And that whole thing about coloring within the lines and that those reasonable guidelines we have for people. So there's consistency, which I think is really important, particularly in public service. We focus on the goals rather than the tasks. And we have to keep asking ourselves this question about, are we accomplishing anything? And we have to differentiate between what a goal is in the way that we're using it versus a task. And here's an example. Years ago, I was a printer, and one of the things I would do for libraries, I worked in a print shop and creating brochures, things like that, way, in the Wayback Machine before electricity. And the person would come to the front desk and say, "Okay, Pat, I want to get out some brochures." And I said, "That's great. So what's the goal?" And they'd look at me blankly and say, "Well, I want to produce 10,000 four-color brochures." I said, "No, if the brochures are successful, then what would happen?" They'd say, "Oh, we're trying to raise money for the library." And I'd say, "How much?" And they'd say, "Well, $15,000." And I said, "Okay, so the goal is not to produce all these brochures. The goal is to raise $15,000. Do you really think sending out sort of a scattergun approach of all of these brochures is the absolute best way to get the money that you want?" And they said, "Oh, gee, well, we like putting out brochures and they're concrete and it's something we can show the trustees." And I said, "I know it's scary, but who are like the wealthy people in your community who support the library? Do you know who they are?" They said, "Oh, yeah, they're really great at the donations." I said, "Why don't you have a couple of people who are good at calling folks to get on the phone, maybe even friends of these wealthy people, and actually call them and ask from them the money?" And there was this long pause. It happened more than once. And they said, "Never thought of that." So instead of spending all the time and money doing a brochure, what they did was went back and within a week they had raised the $15,000 just by making phone calls. So sometimes we get stuck in what is called busy work, or in project management, it's called the activity trap. That instead of focusing on what we're trying to accomplish, we get all tangled up in the day-to-day minutia. And that's dangerous. That's dangerous because then we say, "Well, we sent out the brochures. Isn't that something?" Well, it is, except it didn't accomplish what you wanted to accomplish. And that whole thing about encouraging creativity and initiative. What I like, and when I've had employees, I don't right now, but and we're small, so at most I've had 6 employees at a time, is giving people the goals and giving them the guidelines of what needs to be done, and then say, if you can figure out within the guidelines, which include things like budget and a timeline and what our levels of quality are, if you can figure out how to do it better to achieve the goals, more power. And consequently, we have this incredible tech guy named Tim, and Tim in his private life was a tech musician and like a roadie who set up all the fancy equipment and all that. So when we started doing our webinars and everything, and I said, "Well, these are the platforms we're going to be using." And he knew nothing about webinars, but he knew about sound and he knew about computers. And he said, "Okay, I get what you're trying to accomplish, and I understand our budget and time." And I said, "Okay, go for it." He came up with so many solutions for problems we have that we still use today. And he said that one of the reasons he loved working for us is that he got to engage his mind. And I will be honest that after everything was set up and working smoothly, he did get a little bored and went off to greater glory someplace else. But he was able to create solutions that were beyond the understanding of myself and my husband. We knew computers, we knew nothing about this kind of production that we're doing now. And then finally, the whole thing of giving the same weight to being civility as we do to productivity. Now, it never happens in South Carolina. However, in other states that I've worked in, we have had the situation where someone on the staff is experienced. Maybe they're a little older. They've been around, as my mom says, they've been around the block a few times, credentialed and everything. They do the technical part of their job really well, and somehow they seem to feel that this gives them a pass on being polite to everybody, to be civil, to be friendly, to say good morning and please and thank you. Not to demean people, not to make bad jokes that hurt people's feelings consistently, not to have different ways of treating employees, I mean, and customers when they come to the library, and or employees, right? They don't have what we might call status issues about things. And it's only been in recent years that I've seen more and more libraries, when they talk about evaluating people, evaluate them on basis of courtesy and civility. When I first started working with libraries, which was over 40 years ago, that didn't tend to come up in evaluations. It was more like, do they get the job done? Do they show up on time? Do they do their technical things? So these are the outcomes that we'll be talking about today. Our agenda, basically, it's in two big parts. The first part is talking about what is this thing we all call micromanagement, and what are 7 symptoms. And remember, when you're talking about symptoms, you're talking about arrays. It's not just one thing. And I think a lot of us have learned this during the pandemic. It's not just a cough, and it's not just a fever, it's not just a headache, that usually you need one or more. And doctors look at this as an array of symptoms when they're making a diagnosis. So we'll be talking about an array of symptoms that, if taken together, might be something that we might want to label micromanagement. And then we're going to talk about the cure, which is the expectations model, which has those 3 settings: the goal, the guidelines, and the style, how people do their job. And then I have what I hope is a really nice resource list for you of books and authors who can sort of help you on what we're doing here today. So the first thing is, what is micromanagement? What are the 7 symptoms of micromanagement? And it was interesting to do this program because I teach about micromanagement a lot, but particularly because of the webinars I do for folks like your state library. Every time I do a webinar now, even if it's about a topic I think I know pretty well, I go in and kind of refresh my research. I look at different sites, from everything from formal college and university organizational development classes to what other trainers and consultants in other fields do, to what other library trainers are doing. And guess what? It's one of these words that's actually pretty simple. And the definitions, the descriptions, most people tend to agree. The key idea here is the word excessive. Excessive control of how people are doing things, and excessive attention to detail where it actually interferes with the work that's getting done. So this is the description or definition that I'm going to use today. It's all about excessive control, excessive attention to details. And um, as many people before me have said, this is a library. It isn't really the emergency room of Children's Hospital. So we have to decide, what are the things we're going to pay the most attention to. And by the way, I know this because I can be that way too. This is sometimes hard for people who are perfectionists to back down from. And we'll talk a little bit about that again too. I want to stop for a second and talk about people who are often promoted to supervisor and manager without training and without maybe an aptitude. And I have to say that I am someone who, when I was first in the workplace and I had people to supervise, I had no training and I didn't have the aptitude. In fact, I feel like there should be kind of like an anonymous group for people like me. Hi, I'm Pat Wagner and I'm a bully, and I didn't treat people very nicely. And I was always like, well, I'm like really smart and competent. Why won't people do what I want them to do? And finally, in studying this work for other people, I had very I had a lot of embarrassing epiphanies when I realized, oh my goodness, they're all talking about me. And so oftentimes, even if they're very smart and have been at their job for a long time, that doesn't necessarily mean automatically that someone knows how to supervise. And they may also have been promoted because they had great technical skills or professional skills. They really knew computers. They were a subject matter expert in reference. Sometimes it's they're great with the kids in YA or in the children's department, maybe less so with the adults. They don't have those people skills. And so I find that this is a common thing. Very nice people who don't have those skill sets or aptitude. And then when they try to get people to do stuff, it doesn't work because they sort of order people around and then they end up controlling. And what these folks need more than anything is education and support to learn the new skills. The good news is most people will be able to do that. So here's the 7 symptoms. Now, what I'd like you to do, if you would, while we go through this program, if you're watching this live, you can do this in the chat box. If you are watching this as a recording, you can do this maybe with a group and have people talk about these ideas. Is several ways that you can contribute to the conversation. What might you add to the list that we haven't added before? Have you been a witness to micromanagement, and does it kind of jive with what we're talking about today? Oh, have you been a target of micromanagement? And when I do this with live audiences and ask the question, almost every hand goes up. And finally, okay, this is like a Dr. Phil moment. Have you micromanaged other people and projects? And again, when I'm in front of a in-person audience, guess what? Almost everybody raises their hand. And then we ask people to do a little self reflection about that. If you've micromanaged people, why? And we're going to talk a little bit about the rationales people offer about this. Okay, so here's the 7 systems. We're going to go through them real quick, and then we're going to go through them with a little more detail. They are, first of all, perfectionism. Second of all, the whole issue of reports, too often, too detailed, too much, where people are spending actually more time writing reports about something than documenting them. Third, a lack of the ability to delegate. Things aren't being delegated. And what that means is not giving employees the authority for them to make decisions and take actions on their own. My experience has been when you introduce ideas like the expectations model, people start feeling more comfortable, and sometimes you unleash enormous productivity and creativity. But I've heard, and we'll talk about this a little more, all kinds of excuses that people make about why they can't delegate, why it's impossible. What I find interesting is when that person leaves work, retires, moves to another job, whatever, and a new person comes in who likes to delegate, the same people who I was told, oh no, I can't delegate to them because they're incompetent or uneducated or whatever, do a fine job. Do a fine job. Um, and so delegation is a key piece of micromanagement. They don't see themselves as people who train or share experience. Now, if you happen to have a master's degree in library science or another field, in my mind, that makes you a teacher. That you part of the reason that we have graduate schools is the idea that a good many people who will complete their master's degree in what other topic might stay in the university or college setting or teach. Well, that's great, but I always also think that part of being an educated person is to share what you know with other people, to take immense delight in here's the cool stuff I know and I'm going to teach you too, right? Regardless of how old you are or whatever. My husband is a very educated man, and we've had all kinds of people working for us over the years, including people with criminal records and high school dropouts, whatever, because we look for ability and credentials don't really mean too much to us. And I remember one of the people working for us was a gentleman who was a college dropout, had served a little jail time for some stuff. He was really upfront about us. Great employee. And at one point, my husband came out, and my husband is trained as an economist and a philosopher. He came out of his office with some thick book that was like 200 years old and said, hey, Greg, have you ever studied Thomas Carlyle, the great English Scottish philosopher? And of course, Greg had never heard of him and said, oh, I don't think so, Leif. And my husband said, said to me, can you spare him for 20 minutes? I said, sure. So he dragged poor Greg into his office, and Greg was subjected to a lecture about Thomas Carlyle and came out looking kind of dazed and said, that was really cool. Wow, I'm going to have to look that dude up. So there are people who have that attitude, but part of micromanagement is hoarding information. Then little positive reinforcement, right? And boy, if you're micromanaging, you're basically telling people do this, don't do that. And oftentimes they forget. They forget how positive reinforcement can be such a powerful tool. It's a monologue, not a dialogue. There are very few opportunities for people to have input or before the fact or provide feedback after the fact. So it's like the system has shut down and it's run by one person to the extent of their fingertips. And then one of the things is that I don't care how smart you are. I don't care if you work 20 hours a day. I don't care. If you're a micromanager and you only grow things to the edge of your fingertips, one thing that can happen is projects simply don't get done. There's too much on people's plate. Things get abandoned, they get forgotten. Um, and it, of course, hurts credibility with the organization. And then I've seen this happen more than once. The person in charge who's micromanaging, guess what? They blame the staff. Well, I just don't have competent people working for me. Even while they've like bound them in chains and ropes and don't let them do anything unless the boss is in the room. And then the boss gets to tell them what to do. And then when the bosses leave, they have very few choices about how to get the work done. So I'll stop a moment, and if you have comments to share in the chat box, has anyone seen any of this before? And have you been the target of someone else micromanaging you? So we're going to dig in a little bit deeper on these ideas and see, again, if they're familiar to you or not. Okay, perfectionism. We start with unrealistic standards. We have a limited amount of money. We have a limited amount of time. We also forget that staff time equals money, and we only have so many hours that we can bill that have to be divided up among a lot of different projects. Another thing we notice as far as perfectionism is the person is not able to prioritize. Therefore, they aren't able to prioritize the goals. What's first, what's second, what's third. One thing important about this is we run out of time, we run out of money, and at some point, someone's going to have to make a choice. So, if I was good at teaching my staff what the priorities were, and we worked on this together, it wasn't just me coming down from high, and I was on the road a lot. So if I was gone for a week, I asked each of them to basically, at the end of the day in bullets, tell me what they accomplished. I said, we pay you for your time to do this. Shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. What are the things you accomplished? And people, it became a habit that people knew before they left for the day. They sat down at their computer and said, dump, bump, bump, bump. And I said, don't worry about grammar. No grammar police, just give me the bullets of what you accomplished so I have a picture in my mind of what was going on. And sometimes people would say, well, I know that A is the most important thing we're working on right now. So when I ran out of money and time for B, I went back and started working on A. So guess what? Instead of saying, use your judgment, which is like the most meaningless phrase in the English language, people were able to say, I knew what the priorities were. And by that way, everything else became more productive because if then people get stuck, they know they can go to their supervisor or manager and say, I have 10 things on my plate. I'll only have time to finish 8 today. What are the 2 that can drop off? Because I can't figure it out. And the supervisor can go, this one and this one. Great. Let's go back to work. And you can't do that if you can't prioritize. Not noticing timelines and limits. And again, it's like we don't have an infinite amount of money. I actually got upset with one of my employees because they got lost in perfection land, did something really beautiful, but it was supposed to take 1 hour and it took 6. And I actually got upset, which was on me. I was bad. Don't do this. But I said, it's like you're stealing money from my budget. Do you realize now that we have to sit down and decide what you're not going to be able to do because you chose to spend 6 hours rather than 1 hour in doing thing? And by the way, if I have a perfectionist working for me, one of the ways I help them, and they like this, I've been told they like this, is I say, okay, this project should take 2 hours. At the 90-minute mark, show me what you're doing. It usually was like a webinar design or some graphic for a poster or something, and I'll see where we're going. And oftentimes I'd look at what they had accomplished in 90 minutes and say, great, we're done. go on to the next project. And they'd be going, but, I can improve it. And I said, of course you could. And if I had married for money, we'd have the budget. But I didn't marry for money. So guess what? You have to do it within the guidelines. And one of the people who was a chronic perfectionist, almost to the point of being OCD about how he did things, he said, I feel safe when I work for you because I don't have to guess what the limits are. And he said, I get a little anxious about the fact I'm not doing my job as well as I should. Your reassurances are not enough, but it really helps to have that, okay, 2 hours. And it got to the point because we created this culture is that people will come to me then and say, okay, Pat, I think this is a 2 hour job, or this is a 4 hour job, or I have no idea. What do you want me to do? And I'd say, okay, work on it for 2 hours, then check in with me and see what needs to be done. For some people, it's that feeling of safety, controlling other people in projects because they live in this perfect land and they don't want people to make mistakes. Well, that doesn't happen on our planet. We're not Vulcan. And so, guess what? People, humans make mistakes, they disagree, they misunderstand, they forget, all sorts of things happen. And you can basically lower the noise in the world by making sure certain things are in place, but there will always be the unexpected. It becomes then a rationalization for all the other behaviors we're going to be talking about in a few minutes because, quote, things have to be perfect. Uh, it's never good enough. Wow, one way to destroy morale in a workplace is to be the supervisor or manager who is constantly sending back work to refine, to refine, to refine, and it's never good enough. And people say this disparaging thing, well, it's good enough for government work, which I think is horrible. However, we can say, you know what? We have our A plus game when we have a ton of time and money. Today we don't. So right now, this we're going to do our B game, not the A plus game. I went to a conference at ALA years ago on children because I work a lot with children and YA librarians, and it was like a cool conference with a cool topic. And one of the things the speaker said, she said, remember, in your desire to be innovative, that 2 year old has never seen that particular program before. That 2 year old may have never seen that book before. So if you have a tried and true way to do it that still accomplishes what you want and it still delights audiences, don't feel the pressure to suddenly have to innovate, innovate, innovate every single time. You don't have to tweak it every single time because it may not be new to you, but it's going to be new to the kids. And I'd never thought of it that way before. So that never good enough thing, particularly if we're talking about library land, doesn't feel right to me. And then all these things we've talked about prevent us from growing people, having people grow in skills and competence because everything has to be perfect. And this is something we've seen over and over again. In the world of supervision, we say that the two main goals of supervising people are growing people and keeping them on track. And when we talk about perfectionism, it stifles the growth of other people. There are folks who thrive under having someone who tells them everything to do and how to do it and what to do and gives them that disciplined approach. And you see those great movies about ballet companies where the head of the ballet company was a bully and yelled at everybody every day, and then they became the best ballet company in the world or the best symphony of the world, whatever. But that doesn't work with most human beings under most circumstances. So we have perfectionism. And how many of you have ever had to work for a perfectionist? And how many of you think you might have a little bit of the perfectionist gene? Okay. The next one, number two, is reports too much. My best example for this, I won't tell you the state, famous state, you would have heard of it, where this was a large library district, 25 branches, large sprawling urban area, I'll just say west of the Mississippi. And they had a person who had been head of cataloging, great cataloger, did a great job, and she needed a year or two more to reach certain benchmarks in terms of retirement and what she would get for her pension. So the director, who really admired her a lot, said, you know, I'm going to give you some work to do. It's not really busy work, but it'll be good. It'll be a good retirement position for you. And I'm going to make you a new position, which is manager of branches. And what the manager of branches is going to do is that you're going to help the branches coordinate different projects and things and communicate with them and then gather information from them so we are better able to coordinate programming so we don't have collisions of calendar dates. And if one of the groups comes up with, one of the branches comes up with some cool innovation, to be able to quickly communicate it. And this was before email was so widespread. So a lot of this was done phone calls and faxes and so on. The branch manager said, fine, we like her. Pat's fine. Well, when this lady got into that position, she turned into something else. She was demanding from every single branch manager a detailed report that took a couple of hours every single day. Now, think about this. This was like 25 reports that were detailed. Do you think she actually had time to read them every day? No, she was just stacking them up. She had no idea how to do her job. Things got so bad that when I was there for a staff day, three of the branch managers came up to me and said, we love our director. Our branch coordinator is not a bad person, but we're all planning to quit. Massive mutiny because of this reporting. For some people, it's document, 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 even though no one is ever going to look at those reports. Now, I know at the state and federal level, libraries are required to do a lot of kinds of reporting of different kinds, and that's fine. But then you have to say, if we're gathering statistics, are we really going to use them? Are they going to be current by the time we use them? And do they give an accurate picture of what we're trying to do? For some people, that activity trap is, look, I did the 10,000 brochures. Shouldn't I get a gold star for that? Rather than, but you didn't raise the money. And you got to watch out for that because people will hide behind the um, activity trap as a way to say, yeah, I did all this work, but it didn't accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. It sort of says that they don't trust other people's judgment. And I think that's where you start hurting morale. And the best people who work for you who have options will start leaving. Another thing is that we're in the middle of a crazy period in life right now where everybody is concerned about statistics and numbers. And I think it's a good thing. However, it's not everything. It's not everything. And I visited one library, large urban library, not in South Carolina, where the person who was in charge of tech services had treated collecting quantitative data, metrics, numbers, became almost like a theology for them. And they started using it to punish people. So if you weren't hitting your mark every day on how many books you were cataloging or how many materials you were putting into the computer or what was happening in terms of orders and stuff like that, it actually would affect how much you were paid, if you can believe that. And they wanted my approval. And I was like, no way. The other thing is that there's a kind of person who likes to sit in their office and look through documents. All they want are the numbers and the pieces of paper. I've worked with people who, and now you're going to think I'm making this up. Sometimes I make things up. I'm not making things up here. A library director in the heartland who had not left his office, excuse me, in 25 years. He had never been to a workshop, a training, a conference, a director's meeting in his state, and he did not attend the training programs and the staff days of his staff. He just sat in his office all day for 25 years. I was told this by the other directors in his state because he got in a new board. The trustees say, and he had to leave. But everything he knew about the library was a piece of paper. And when we say the map is not the territory, I'm sure we've all had the experiences of having a map to a place, and then we go to the place and the place doesn't actually look like the map. The roads aren't where the map says. So what happens with reporting too much, it pulls people away from what we might call the real world. Lack of delegation, not allowing others to make meaningful decisions, not just they sharpen my pencils, and not being able to assign what we call point people. And so we would have different point people in our little office about it's okay, you're the person in charge of this. So, for example, Toby was in charge of customer service. And the reason for that is he had come to us having been a customer service person at one of the big cable companies. And he was the person who handled all of the worst complaints from people. He wrote, and he still has the record for the best emails I've ever read of anyone, and set standards for how we communicated with people about our webinars and programs where there were trouble. So I said, Toby, you're in charge of this. You're the point person. And he said, so I'm responsible. And I said, yes. And what I'd like you to do is to come up with some templates on how we do customer service, and I want you to write the handbook for it and work with other people. Well, Toby went on to better things 5 years ago. I still consult the handbook that Toby created for us. It was awesome. That whole thing about not accepting that people make mistakes, so you don't plan for the extra time for what we call wiggle room. Minimally, I think, minimally 5% of a budget, which includes people, time, and money, should be put aside for something's going to mess up and we don't know what yet, but we need a little bit in the budget to handle that, what we need if something goes wrong. What I see too many libraries doing, because you have this great can-do attitude, and I'm not being sarcastic about that, you really do, is you wait. How can I put this? You decide that whatever resources you have, you're going to use them up to the very edge with no room for anything else. So if you have $100 to do something, well, some folks are very thrifty, but $100 to do something, we spend $101 because we want to use every penny. If you have a certain amount of time to plan for something, you do everything up to the edge, often because you got too many balls up in the air. You juggle too much. So there's no room for wiggle room. Therefore, the perfectionist, the micromanager says, well, I don't have time or money for that because they have not delegated and they've not thought about the wiggle room. And that whole thing of what happens when employees have to consult them, uh, and you're not there. I worked with one federal library, and it was in a big region in the West. And the boss was a micromanager, and he would leave for a week at a time, going to visit other federal agencies and going to training programs and so on. And every time he walked out the door, work would stop. One person told me um, that they used their time to good advantage because they finally had time to read all those Russian novelists they wanted to read in college and never had time. I'm not making this up. People just sat at their desks for hours, fiddling and doing little tiny things because the boss wanted to be in the room and never thought of what happened when they left. I know this sounds like an extreme example, but I think that's what happens with a lot of people who micromanage. They don't realize what happens when, in effect, they leave the room. And then, as I mentioned before, people who are good employees who feel they have opportunities elsewhere leave because they want to be able to grow. They want to be able to do other things well. Lack of workplace education. And there's two parts to this, which I think are kind of amusing. On one hand, you find, well, actually, there's three parts, but we'll do it to two. One hand, there is only education offered to people who have status. So I have visited libraries that only the MLSs get to go to training programs, only the MLSs get to go to conferences, only the MLSs go and do workshops. Only there's no budget for anyone else, is what I've told. Now, on the other hand, there's the kind of workplace I visit where training is considered kind of a punishment for excuse my bad language, for stupid people. So if someone like me comes in for a training program, they say, oh, this is a program in communication. And Pat, we shut down the library to have you here all day. The trustees gave us permission. Everyone's getting paid. But of course, we exempted the managers. And I'm like, Why did you exempt the managers? Well, they all have advanced degrees. They don't need this stuff. And I said, do you know what it looks like to everybody else if the bosses aren't in the room? This is punishment. Now, Bill Gordon, years ago, was the executive director of the American Library Association in Chicago. Wonderful man. And he started bringing me in to do training programs for the staff of the American Library Association. I think about 180 people at the time were working in downtown Chicago. And we would start the program, and Bill would look around and he'd disappear. And he'd come back, and he'd usually have 5 or 10 people with him very sheepishly, and he'd make them all sit in the front row. And I asked people about that, and they said, "You know what he does?" And they said, "This is why we love Bill. He will watch and see who comes to the programs, and he will literally go office to office throughout the building to make sure all those other people show up." And sometimes I feel like I want to do that at some of the places I visit. So it's an interesting thing. Now, I have visited workplaces where there was no on-site education or training for anyone for 25 years. And then on the other hand, I visit libraries that are very well run and they have frequent training regardless of the cost. Sometimes they raise money through the foundation or the friends group if their overseers in the city or county won't give them money for training. There's always grants out there. They're always, finding grants to give people money for training and so on. They make this important. They make it a priority. And guess what? Those are some of the best run um, well-established libraries in the country of all sizes. And I walk in some days and I say, "Oh my goodness, you guys know all this stuff. Do you really want me here?" "Oh no, there's a lot of value to having everyone in the room hearing the same message. We need reminders. We value our people. We invest in them this way." And there's a great payoff. But again, you know what? If you're micromanaging people, you don't care if they know anything because you know it all. Negative reinforcement. The boss walks in the room and everybody shrinks. Everybody looks smaller. They frown or suddenly have a blank expression on their face. They kind of hunker down. Why? Because the only time the boss comes to see them is if they've done something wrong or if the boss wants something from them. I know in trainings I do, I have mentioned this gentleman's name. Sadly, he's no longer with us. Mike Jogstetter, who was the state librarian of North Dakota, who came from a military family. And I worked with him over several years with great delight. And part of it is we'd walk into the North Dakota State building where the state library was at the time, and we'd walk into an office and people would look up from their work and see their boss, and they would just get these big grins on their face, these big smiles. It was like, wow, the boss is here. Now, understand that Mike had come from the technical world and really cared about standards and people getting things done because he wasn't just like trying to be likable and fluffy, but he treated people well, was really into positive reinforcement, cared about their work, and did things. And people, you could see the delight in their eyes when the boss walks in. I want to be the kind of person that when I walk into a room, people are happy to see me because they know most of the time it's because I want to praise them. I want to thank them. I'm checking in so they can educate me about their work and that they can ask for help. The way one director told me, she said, when I go, she's a library director, has about 15 branches. She said, when I go into a branch, I sit and listen to the staff because they're giving me my marching orders about what it is I need to do to improve what's going on. Um, People who are micromanagers spend a lot of time fixing things just for tweaking, for the sake of fixing things. Very little gratitude, very few thank yous. Um, there isn't significant praise for things going on. Mostly long lectures about what people have done, always bringing up past mistakes, right? They live in the past. Input and feedback. That whole idea that conversation is a dialogue, not a monologue. So one thing I find with micromanagers, they don't listen to uh, employee complaints. They don't take employees' complaints seriously because why should they? If it's not in their vision, it doesn't exist. Also, this is something interesting, and I don't have any scientific explanation, or, you just got to take this with a grain of salt. But oftentimes when I visit libraries where there's a lot of micromanagement going on, what isn't in place is a formal, legal, enforced, trusted grievance policy for employee concerns. So it's a way of stifling communication. And, again, not scientific, but it's something I watch for. Don't take the time to educate folks about money. No checkpoints for determining productivity. So there's no way of determining if you're doing it right or wrong until someone yells at you. Only a few anointed people in the inner circle are ever informed about something going on and get uh, to go to meetings or to participate in input about something until the hammer drops and suddenly we're going to be surprised about this. There's no record made of employee concerns for follow-up. So you start saying, hey, there's a pattern here. We need to address it quickly. And consequently, guess what? Places with micromanagement tends to be rife, I love that word, rife with gossip and rumors because people don't have legitimate ways to get information, so they make it up, right? They kind of make things up. Not so good. And lack of closure. And there's all sorts of terms in the world of project management that are fun to play with. They're little pieces of jargon that explain this idea of um, the lack of closure. Project creep. That's when, oh, let's embellish this with gold. Oh, we bought 3 of these. Let's buy 400 candles. 400 candles is better than 3 candles. Not paying attention, you didn't have the budget for that. So project creep is taking on more and more and more. Project drift is where you don't have goals to anchor you, and suddenly you're doing something that you never intended to do in the beginning, and you finish it and they say, well, excuse me, this was supposed to be a program on early education, child development, reading readiness, and you put on this really fun event, but it had nothing to do with reading readiness. Where was the reading readiness part? Pet projects where someone is sometimes covertly protecting something that they love and they spend all their time doing has nothing to do with what needs to be accomplished. So they don't have time to finish projects. Sacred cows. Sacred cows, right? Where you're not allowed to even criticize, even mention anything negative. And I find micromanagers have this tendency to be to tell people that if you criticize anything, you're not a team player. Rather than say, let's see if by the criteria we're using, there's legitimacy. And even if there isn't, we're going to listen to the concern and see if there's anything behind it and what we can do. People will say then, you know what? I didn't get my way, but I felt I was treated fairly and they listened to me. And I know more than I do now. And I may bring it up later, but I'm okay. I'm okay that I got it. No sunset for failing projects where nobody says, you know what, we've had this project going for 5 years, hasn't done a darn thing. Let's stop it. Use the resources someplace else. Permanent standing committees. One of my, wow, when I'm queen of the world, we're going to eliminate 95% of the committees on this planet and we're not going to miss any of them. So, permanent standing committees that just meet and nothing gets done. Guess what? Things don't get finished. No term limits for the same reason, and then projects are sometimes just forgotten. I walked into one large library, an academic library in New York State, and they had this big poster up about a children's collection that they were putting together. I thought, way cool. And I went and talked to the head of the project. I was doing a customer service survey, and they said, oh, well, that never happened. And I said, well, that's interesting because you still have the sign in front of the department, right? So here are some of the rationales and see if you've seen any of these yourself. I don't want to lower my standards. Teaching takes too much time. The plan is not good enough. I must keep improving and improving. I had no time for input before the project started. So, therefore, I was forced to do it without waiting to see if it was good or not from other people. I don't have time to praise people for doing their paid jobs. I'm working on another project I finished these slides a while ago. I'm working on another project for another state library, and guess what? This was exactly what one of the people said this morning. I don't have time to praise people for doing their paid jobs. I don't think it should be necessary. If I want it done right, I have to do it myself. And people do that as if they're bragging. For me, it means that they're not a very competent supervisor. My staff's competent. They won't work unless I nag them. That's because they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. And I can break the rules because of my status and position. So again, any of these ever happen to you? Or did you ever do any of these or say these things about people you worked with? So let's go to the expectations model. If this was a college class for credit, I would expect you to suck up to me for a great grade and just tell me, oh, this is the most wonderful thing I've ever seen, Pat. Thank you for sharing it. So here's the graphic, okay? And we're going to take it piece by piece, but here's the whole one. We are trying to achieve the goals, almost like a rocket ship. And on each side of the rocket ship, to keep it kind of on course toward the goals, are what we call the professional guidelines and the civility guidelines. So the goals are what we achieve if we're successful doing the work we were hired to do. The professional guidelines are things like, are we achieving while we're doing this? Here's the standard. Think of them as standards or guidelines for what we agree to as quality. This is the amount of staff time and money we have to do it. This is the timeline of when it needs to be finished. Here are ethical standards that have to be followed. These are legal contracts. We're going to go more into that in a minute. And these are the required rules that we have to follow. Terms of civility, everyone has manners. Everybody pays attention to other people. Everyone is patient. We're people of character. We treat people fairly and equally. We're calm. No drama queens, please. And we're good humored. And it doesn't mean we have to be telling jokes all the time, but we see the world in a positive light. We don't have the attitude if we come to work with and we're in a bad mood, we say, well, I'm having a bad day. Now you have to have a bad day too. And then we have style, how the tasks are done, right? Achieve the goals within the guidelines. The style, with some exceptions we'll talk about, can be up to that person. So the uses are great. You can create a framework, and this is why I was so excited about this. I'm very visual. I'd never had a graphic that explained it. I sort of felt I could talk about it, but now I can put this in front of a person, actually make a graphic and give each of us a pen and we discuss it. So you can discuss goals and guidelines. It can be in talking about an individual for the job description. It may be a group thing. A work team comes together and says, what is the expectation for the group, for the department, for the branch, for special projects, for ongoing projects, as part of committees when you're working on professional association committees or joint committees throughout a larger institution within your city or within your county and so on. And you can even use it to basically do the strategic plan. You can use the same model for saying, what are the goals we're trying to achieve regarding the strategic plan, and how are we going to do them? Between you and me, this is when I use this oftentimes with boards of trustees who I think are maybe, from my point of view, micromanaging the director and the staff. I mean, it really isn't up to your trustees to decide what color the front door is. Um, it's nice politically to let them choose, but that's really not what they're for. That's really not what they're for. Okay. So here's a little kind of an assignment you can do, particularly when you go back to your library. How many people who work with you and for you do you think actually know the expectations of what they should be doing if we use this model as a guide? How many know the goals they're kind of supposed to achieve? How many know the guidelines? Right? How do they know when they're doing the right thing that gives them room to make decisions within the guidelines, within the guidelines? How many know? And this is actually something you can do at a staff meeting, you can do by email. about what those expectations are. And I hope you're pleasantly surprised. Okay, so first of all, the goals. I pulled this up. I understand it's a photo from South Carolina. Confused me. No, I think this is actually maybe from Alaska or even Colorado. So here's that goal again, right? The most important part of what we're talking about is if we establish the goals. Goals are called lots of different things in the literature: accomplishments, successes, end games, destinations, outcomes, intentions, and so on. And I don't want you to spend a minute arguing about what it should be called. Just agree to a label. I don't care if you call it bananas or pineapples, whatever. One thing important is goals are always sorted, as we talked about before. What's the most important goal, the second, and the third most important goal, so people can make choices without the bosses having to be in the room. And some places I visit, they even have this on posters or on well, posters, for example, in a staff room or in a hallway to remind people on this project, we've decided what the criteria is, and here are the 3 to 5 goals. Never more than 5. 3 is preferred. But remember, it's not the same as the job description. And we have some examples to show you here. So we might say we were successful because we finished shelving the books. But what we're trying to achieve is having it easier for people to find the books they want. They check out more books. It boosts our circulation figures. And the truth is, maybe we'll get more money because we look better on paper. We might say, wow, 500 kids attended that story hour that we set up for toddlers and, baby book programs and so on. But what really happens, we hope, is we get a report back from the school district that the kids who were attending those programs had improved language skills and were more successful in school, right? We pave the parking lot. That just seems like a practical thing, but more library users are able to find parking spots. Consequently, that increased the attendance at events and more people could come. Now, this may sound like a little thing to some of you, but when my mom was alive, she lived across the street from the biggest library in her city. And mom was always a library user, except she said in the hard weather of the upper Midwest, when the pavement would break up in the asphalt and so on. And she had one of those, I used to call 'em mama cars, one of those big old Buicks that looked like tanks. They were great. I mean, she could have had a car bounce off of her in an accident and she would be fine, but it was kind of low to the ground. And she said, "Well, I'm not going to the library." I said, "Why not, Mom?" And she said, "Well, they haven't repaved the parking lot, and every time I drive in, it scrapes the bottom of my car. So guess what? Me and all the ladies at the senior center, we don't go to library anymore." So again, some of these things I don't make up. So it really does make a difference about how we fix up the exterior. We finished remodeling the teen space. We're very proud of that, but we also knew that why we were doing it is because we had been very successful creating a place for young people to feel emotionally safe, and by in remodeling it and improving it, we made the space larger so we could serve more kids. So what we did is the what of the world. But what we accomplished is the goal of why we're doing it. Why are we doing this? What's the impact on our community? What's the impact on our customers? And that should be the main thing sort of in our mind when we think about everything we do in the library, hopefully is for the people we serve and the institutions they support. So what this thing is about, keep off the curb, setting guidelines. So we have 2 sets of guidelines to talk about. Um, and I didn't find a term that I liked better than this. You might find in your research, but we call these the professional guidelines. That we agree upon the quality, we agree upon the resources we have, which includes but not limited to the budget, and is really often about staff time, which is, if you haven't noticed, probably the most expensive line item in the library's entire budget. Also, how much time do we have and what are the deadlines, or what's reasonable about accomplishment? The ethics, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Legal contracts. Usually, when we talk about legality and contracts, for most of the libraries I visit, it's something like this. We are part of a consortium, and they do our cataloging for us, and we share our cataloging with other groups in the consortium. So we have guidelines that we abide by as far as how we enter data and what kinds of data that we enter in terms of our cataloging. We're not the Morgan Library in New York, so we don't carry things out to the 405th decimal point. On the other hand, we do have certain standards, particularly for the nonfiction collection, and there's 5 ways to do it, and we do it this way. This is usually what we mean by legal, but we also might mean that we have to abide by fire laws for doing certain things. So nope, in our library, we can't have open candles. So that's a guideline that we might use in doing special events and talking to people. And the required rules are if we are part of a larger institution like county government and county government has rules, those rules apply to us in terms of how we use personnel, how we use volunteers, how we treat people in different ways, rules having that the administration has to abide by from state personnel offices about how people are compensated, what kinds of money are taken out of their paycheck, what are the basic requirements for insurance and so on. So the hardest part for sure is being able to have a group of people who come together and say, what do we mean by quality? And a lot of people say, well, we can't talk about quality because it can't be quantified. Yes, but it can be described. And in professional guidelines, we have to be able to say, this is the outcome that we want. And to achieve it, these are certain standards that we have. So we might have um, certain simple, and I don't want a bureaucracy with 400 pages how to do story hour, but we might have what we might call a cheat sheet that say our guidelines for doing story hour are this. Our guidelines are that you say hello to every parent coming in and greet them personally. Learn the names of the children and say hello to every child who comes to story hours. You're not just sitting there in the back, but you're engaging with them in the front, and that's important to us. That you engage the parents in talking about the kinds of books we're offering and what they'd like to see more of. When we're actually there with the child, we want to make sure that we realize it's about the kids, not us. We want to talk slower. We want to hold the book out. We want to engage the kids, have them sing something or say something or wave their hands, something they all can do. We want to make sure you just don't focus on 2 or 3 adorable children and pay attention only to them. You're paying attention to all the children in the room, things like that. Um, what are limits on time and budget? And a lot of these things come out of what you might call the management triangle or the iron triangle that talks about quality and time and money and or resources, and the fact that if we really want high quality things, then guess what, we need the time and money to do that as well. And ethical standards, and I teach ethics, and I sort of stick with 4 very basic ideas about ethics that in libraries that have been around for a while. Confidentiality, so you have a great idea, but it's going to um, violate the privacy of the people who come to the library. Transparency in decision making means that as we do what we do, we communicate with each other. So we don't do it behind closed doors unless we really have to. Fair treatment and access to materials for all have been around for a while, and we're paying, I think, better attention to these in 2021 as far as what it means, what equity means, for example, and what diversity means as well. So these are examples of professional guidelines. Then we have what we call civility and the civility guidelines. And I'm not a librarian, so I teach weeding and I teach a little bit about reference, but the truth is the stuff on the right side of the expectations model is where I spend most of my time. So again, it will surprise some people if you haven't already, start evaluating folks on how they treat other people as much as their productivity. My husband, computer programmer, worked a lot with some very fine companies. And I remember once they fired a guy who was a whiz bang technology person because he was rude to other people. He thought that he sort of was above other things, that he would not be required. Like he had this cash register in his head. And he says, "Well, I'm incredibly productive. I do my work beautifully. All our customers like my work, so why should I have to be polite to the people in the library?" I ran into a special librarian at a large city in the West who was in the disciplinary cycle, and he even said to me in front of the whole group we were in, including his supervisor, that he didn't feel that he had to be obligated to be nice to people. And he said, and I quote, "I didn't go to library school to have to smile at people. I am a librarian's librarian. People come to me for my expertise, and that's all that matters." And yes, he was fired for that. So even though you're competent, you don't get a pass on manners. And to quote my mom, moods and feuds are self-indulgent. So I want people where I don't have to worry if two people don't get along. I really dislike this thing. Well, Pat and Tiffany don't get along, but they're at the same branch. Oh my goodness, what are we going to do? Maybe if we put them on different floors, maybe if they change shifts and Pat will work on second shift and just on weekends. No, that sort of begs the question that a person ability to get along with people, even if we don't like that person, right? We just pay attention to our work and do the work we need to do, is as important as the competency of people with their technical skills. I want someone, by the way, who's an even keel, right? Low maintenance. That's why I said the thing about drama queens. I don't want someone that little things gets them hysterical. I'm sorry, we're in a public service organization with stress, and at least we need to be able to appreciate people. But it is a certain skill set to get along with people. That's important as anything else that's done in the library, to get people understanding about not gossiping, particularly negative gossiping about coworkers or people. It's great to gossip about somebody's oncoming wedding or an award they won, or let's see those photos of the new kids and the grandkids. That's okay. But there's a lot of other things we do that aren't okay. And to quote my husband, this idea of what it means to be unconditionally constructive, meaning that if there's a problem, our first impulse is, what can we do to make this better? Right? What can we do to make this better rather than, playing the blame game, for example? So these are all things in civility guidelines. And what I found interesting was maybe about 20, 25 years ago, I started seeing civility clauses being written into union contracts. And what I was told, and I've worked with several unions, not just unions in libraries, but like the Teamsters and the AFL-CIO. They said union leadership said to me more than once, "We're tired of employees using the union as an excuse for bad behavior. So we want to make sure that people who are part of our union, excuse me, have guidelines also for behavior as well." So we've got that um, productive guidelines, so the professional guidelines, and now we have the civility guidelines. So what about style? How people do their job? And I like the idea of the rocket ship, and this is how Bill and Wendy taught it to me, is that we really want something on the sides, curbs or parameters, limits, to kind of center us, right? To sort of say this is the direction we want to go, and so that how we're doing our job ends up achieving the goals that we want to achieve. I always thought that was great. Style, again, is how someone does their job. And there comes up a lot of, I think, kind of amusing stories having to do with people deciding whether it's micromanagement or not in talking about style. So the first one that comes to mind, and this happened with a large library system here in Colorado, And it was a regional system, meaning that it was not just one county. It was probably, 1/6 or 1/7 of our fairly large state. And the director was very charismatic, smart, very well liked. And he hired a new cataloger. So they were acting as a consortium and taking care of a lot of cataloging for the small rural libraries, getting people up to speed. Computers were just being introduced. So we're talking a few years ago. And he called me up, and I will pretend his name was Bill. So Bill calls me up and he said, "Pat, I'm so upset about the new cataloger I hired." And I said, "Okay." He said, "This is the problem." He said, "Pat, I know you don't know much about cataloging, but trust me, there's an appropriate way to do cataloging." And by the way, this was it was still copy cataloging, but this was before you had all of the computer tools you do now to look up books and so on. So there was some books to do. Also, she was good enough and experienced enough that she was also doing original cataloging for historical books and documents and materials from that part of the country. And he said, "So there's a way to do it, and it's sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5." And he said, "I walked by her desk the other day, and she was doing it 2, 3, 5, 7, 14, 14, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5." I said, "And?" He said, "And Pat, it made me sick to my stomach to watch her catalog." And when I tried to tell her, she just sniffed at me and said, "You're micromanaging me," dismissed me, and ignored me. So he said, "Was I micromanaging?" And I said, "Okay, Bill, first of all, tell me about her as a cataloger. First of all, how's her output?" He said, "Well, she's great, very productive." And I said, "Great. So we've got the time thing done. What about quality?" "Oh, she's just right up to speed. Very pleased with the results of what she's doing." "Great. How does she treat the people in the libraries that you serve?" "Oh, people love her. She is not condescending. She doesn't treat people like she's better than them. When she goes to visit the libraries, she's so helpful. She's such a good teacher." And I said, "So what is this doing for the system?" He said, "Well, frankly, it's improved our reputation with the people that we serve. And the libraries say this is making them feel much calmer about the whole automation process because she's helping them get ready for that. And it's working really well." He said, "But I can't stand how she's doing it." And I looked at him and I said, "Bill, she's achieving the goals within the guidelines, and how she does it is style. And yes, you are micromanaging her." And she was at her job for 25 years, then went and worked as the head cataloger for one of the libraries in the system, retired a year or two ago, well beloved. And I always thought of this, yeah, um, I don't know that much about cataloging. I've only done a little copy cataloging, but I love the idea that somehow the way she was doing it was making her ill. Now, another issue comes up sometimes regarding the expectations model, and this was in a library where the director's problem was how people were shelving. Now, when you think about it, what were they turning the books upside down? I mean, were they tossing the books across the room? What did they mean? Well, the director said, "People are lazy. My two shelvers are very lazy. They will go up to a table where a book has been left, and they will take the book. Even if there's a pile of books, they only take one book at a time. They pick the book up, they walk across the room holding the one book, and they put it in the book cart. Then they stroll back to the table and pick up another book." And when I said something, they said I was micromanaging. And I've come to you, Pat. Was I micromanaging? Because I just think they're being lazy. And I said, "Okay, let's start at the beginning. First of all, I assume, like a lot of libraries, one of your goals is that by the end of the day, all the books that have been picked up from the tables and are in the book cart are shelved. So you start the day with everything shelved. And you're then go through the process of picking books out of the book drop and doing whatever you do to check them back in, and then you start the process again. Then also you're picking up other books. They said, yeah, that's pretty much how they do it. And I said, okay, so let's start. By the end of the day, are the books all shelved? Yes. Great. And how accurate is the shelving? Oh, it's great. Yeah. We spot check and yeah, they're doing fine. Good. So they're getting the stuff done in a timely fashion. The quality level is there. How did they get along with other people in the library? Oh, fine. And I said, well, if they finish their work early by any chance, how are they about, doing a shift with the circ desk or going back in tech services, seeing if they help? Oh, they're very cheerful if you ask them to do something. And I said, well, first of all, here's the bad news. The bad news is they're achieving the goals within the constraints. But here's the good news for you as a manager. You're just not giving them enough to do. They're literally filling the time you have given them because they can finish the work a lot faster than waiting till the end of the day. You just have to sort of sit down and discuss with them this job description because it might not warrant maybe full-time people, or you have to be really clear. If you do this, you have to do this, and sort of tighten up the expectations is what's going on. So we've used this sometimes where are they achieving the goals within the constraints? They're getting their job done, they're getting along with other people, and the quality of what they're doing means that you're achieving the goals of access to information and people who work with them feeling good about having them help out at other things. Usually the standards for a position are usually listed in the guidelines and may often appear in the job description or anything else you're doing to talk to people about their job. And of course, there's exceptions. When you have a group of people who are working together, you might say there are certain things that we have to do the same. We have to do the same. Here's one that it doesn't come up very often, but can come up, and it's about you're cleaning up a staff room, and maybe you're washing dishes by hand, and you might have to say everyone has so many ways of washing dishes, but we have a group of people and we don't want people to get food poisoning and people have standards. So you use hot soapy water and you actually detail on a cheat sheet how it needs to be done. But the truth is most of what happens in a library don't need guidelines that are that strict. Another place it comes in where you might have to have certain standards has to do with when people are on one or more shifts, like a first and second shift during a weekday and then a weekend shift, and you want people to leave their work in such a way that the next person doesn't hunt for things. So you might have a rule saying in the children's craft area, we have certain ways that we want stuff stored simply because there's consistency so the next person can find things. So we try to be common sense about this, but I spend more time trying to get people to back off from micromanaging people than I do having them improve certain standards. And again, there's no simple formula, and I apologize to people who are looking for a formula, but I find that even if you just start with the model, it often leads to a very, very productive conversation. So here's something that is interesting, and I'd love to get some comments from you as we come to the end of the webinar, is given what you know so far about the expectation model, and remember, if you're expecting a good grade today, of course you have to gush about it, but let's be practical. What might be hard for some people about applying the expectation model in real life? What's hard about it? And what I encourage people to do is even if you do see difficulties, and I hope you do, that way you can start thinking about what's part of this that we can use to improve communication and productivity and how people treat each other. Maybe we're not going to make this big elaborate model right off. And I would say in my personal experience, if you have a well-run library where people like each other and trust each other and get along pretty well, communication is good, up and down and sideways, it can take 3 to 5 months to put something like this together as a first draft. It can take 3 months just discuss what we mean by quality. as well. So what might be difficult about this? And if you have some ideas, you can put that in the chat box and let me share what I've heard over the years. Probably the number one is the lack of support from above the food chain. And it might be the director. And if you're a director, it might be from county HR, from the administration in the library and above in the library, the trustees and so on, who don't appreciate what it is that you're trying to do and that it takes some time. People say, I don't have time to do this stuff. And the thing is, I believe that this is really important. This is sort of the core for me of what it means to be a supervisor, a manager, or a leader. And it's kind of like saying, oh, I don't, how, let's do this. What do you think about library users who say, I don't have time to read to my children? Um, if it's a priority, people do what they need to do. I've been doing this work a long time, and I'm not a psychologist, but my specialty, you might say, is practical human behavior. Never once in all these years has anyone ever come to me and say, Pat, I'm having real trouble. I made some double chocolate black walnut brownies last week. Cut them into nice squares. They've been sitting on the sideboard in my dining room for the last week. And I walk by those double chocolate black walnut brownies every single day and I forget to eat one. Could you help me make the brownies a priority in my life? No one needs help making brownies a priority in their life. And for me, I would hope that people would make their number one priority in their library, particularly if they're in a leadership position, as good communication and improving that communication. That whole thing about setting standards feels like micromanagement. And yes, if someone has been doing their job for a long time and has developed their own comfortable, eccentric ways of doing it, talking about things like standards can be uncomfortable. Most of the time, you can kind of reverse engineer the model out of what people are already doing and then just tweak it a little bit. Good employees kind of do this without even thinking about it. But in other cases, if you're trying to set like standards for consistency at a service desk, yeah, there will be some pushback. Some people will be insulted. How dare you criticize me? Sometimes it really is hard to think about what the goals are. And I tell people, take a look at your strategic plan because that's usually where we know what's going on. Yes, it can take time to agree on things like quality. So sometimes we say, okay, we're going to make it a draft. This is our draft on on what quality means, and we're going to um, put it out for, well, we're going to try it for a month or two and see what happens and then stop and kind of do it in steps that way. And then some people say, I don't like all the discussion because it's going to open up a can of worms. And I tell you, let those worms fly. Let them out in the world so you can deal with them rather than hiding difficult issues and hoping they'll go away on their own, which is rarely the case. So I'm going to share some resources and turn things back over to Tiffany and see if we had some interesting comments or any questions that we will have time for. By the way, the probably the two most important books, if you want to, books on this are the Clark Campbell book on the one-page project manager and Dick Groat's book on discipline without punishment. But there's a lot of wonderful books about project management these days that are built for people like you and me, not for the like so-called experts. So, Tiffany, do we have any questions or comments from the group?
We have a lot of good comments.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, we do have a question. How would you deal with a manager delegating micromanaging tasks to an employee that expected to tell other employees what said tasks are, which may cause some friction?
Oh, so they're delegating the micromanagement.
I can see that
Well,
happening.
I love that. Oh, yes. No, it's true because where I've seen it is where the director or the manager wants to be the good guy and they want to have a reputation as being nice. But then what they do is they assign another person to be mean, and the mean person won't say anything because they're a good trooper And so the person who's truly the micromanager gets their wonderful reputation, and then they can complain to about the other person. Well, that's just Pat. That's just Pat. That's how she is, right? Like they have no control over it. And I tell people, if you don't like someone's behavior in a workplace, look at the person above them and ask yourself, why are they either getting away with that behavior, or they've actually been told how this is. And boy, this is going to be another, like, let's like a 3-hour retreat, because it really has to do with everything from politics, what the person who asked the questions workplace goals are, and everything else. I find that confronting the micromanager in this way often doesn't work, even though, not knowing anything else about the situation, I agree that it's an awful position to be put into, um, on what goes on. And so I'm not trying to be, how would you say, superficial here, but this is the kind of situation where I tell people you should start looking for another job, um, unless that person who is micromanaging by proxy, how about we call it that, is going to be there for um, forever or a short period of time or whatever. And then the question is, what happens when you refuse? And so I would put all my ducks in a row and really start thinking about what you need to do and how you need to say it, and decide if you have any allies in the workplace who can give you advice. But this is one of the hardest situations to deal with. This requires coaching and a lot of double chocolate black walnut brownies as well. And
Um,
remember, I don't charge for phone or email consultation, folks. So if you email me, I might be able to offer you some information, and particularly the um, the book on Getting Things Done by David Allen and The Results Without Authority by Tom Kendrick might have some good suggestions for you as well.
what other questions? Anybody have any other questions? Please type in the chat, or comments, situations.
Yeah, and hypotheticals like, well, I have this friend. Actually, one of the people involved in this other program this morning said, "What do I do about someone who won't do their work?" Asking on behalf of a friend. We always thought that was pretty funny because it's a class on supervision.
Question or kind of a comment earlier on um, developing staff members and the right amount of involvement to give them guidance to help them develop their skills rather than leaving them adrift, I
Hmm.
guess.
Well, what we did with our place, and okay, we can talk about uh, graphic design. So I couldn't draw a tree if my life depended on it, but I've been doing graphic design for a long time. Hired this awesome art director. And what we did, we set standards for how long to struggle before asking Pat or my husband Leif for help on the computer stuff. And so I made everybody understand we're a teaching organization. We want everyone to grow. That's part of the overhead that we pay for you working here, and we're happy to do it. But it can't go on forever. So it was kind of a rule that people knew if they struggled with something, let's say more than an hour or two, they should check in with me or with my husband. And yes, sometimes it was really hard to walk by my art director's station and look over her shoulder, and she would be struggling with something that I could fix in a minute, literally. But I was willing to invest that time. It's part of the overhead, and what they got instead of big salaries with a lot of benefits. And we were real clear when we hired people that we didn't expect them to stay forever, because it's kind of a dead end job. But on the other hand, great place to work, no no requirements in terms of how you dress, no dress code. You could bring your dog, uh, you know, and we were really comfortable with people having to do other things, flexible schedule. And yes, you get to learn how to do things, but then it took a little time because people were proud and a little embarrassed. But then finally, the art director knew, okay, Pat, I've been struggling with this an hour. And I said, okay, what's the timeline on the project? Do we have wiggle room? She said, no, we're coming up to a deadline. And I said, okay, I'm going to fix it. I'll talk out loud while I fix it, show you what I did and hand it back to you. And I go, magic, 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 and fix it. She said, oh my goodness. Okay. And she'd take notes. And you know what? She was good. So that issue never came up again. But that's the other thing about setting benchmarks and timelines in what we do.
I find that sometimes it's a little the opposite with a lot of libraries. I hear a lot of managers saying their staff come to them with every little thing, especially like customer issues or security issues, incident kind of things, rather than trusting to their own judgment.
Yes.
Now, in some cases, I think that that is prompted by the micromanagement, and
Yeah.
if the manager um, is critical of their solutions, they don't have more of them.
Yes.
But
Well, one of the things for some things, the easy way is to say, what would you do if I wasn't here? What would you have done if you couldn't have gotten a hold of me? And most of the time, the person will say something pretty plausible. And then you say, great, that's the right answer. Go away, go back to work, in effect. And yes, it can be a symptom that people have no wiggle room. I had mentioned before we started with Tiffany about how the Fort Collins Public Library hired a department, a retired department store manager to run circulation. And one of the things she did was institute what at the time was a very radical idea, was if somebody had a fine of less than $5, the person at the front at the circ desk, even if they were a part-time page, could erase it from their record rather than spend 20 minutes arguing about a 5-cent five. It sounded like a little thing, but she was able to establish a very specific triage. If it's this kind of problem, handle it. If it's this or this kind of problem, find the supervisor. If it's this or this or this kind of problem, then it's time to call the director and shut the library down. And so people didn't have to guess. And as you say, what I hear people saying, I used my judgment, I was yelled at, I'm never going to use my judgment again.
okay, thank you.
Mhm.
We are at the end of time. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.